These are the key areas I'll cover today, and I'm focusing on the specific context of the summer's undergraduate pre-sessional course at the University of Reading in Reading, so the UK based. Just to give very, very brief context, the undergraduate course is part of a wider summer pre-sessional programme on the Reading campus with our postgraduate programmes. As has been mentioned, we were fully online and majority asynchronous for the sort of reasons that my colleagues were talking about before. And you can see here as well, highlighted in no particular order, a brief overview of the academic team, and the course directors highlighted there with my role, just to kind of give a flavour of the fact that we're talking about a larger programme and team setting. So I've been doing some sort of reading and reflecting about well-being at work, and models of well-being at work often focus on this idea of balance. So you can see here two of the best known models. And obviously the idea is that an imbalance towards the negative aspects will result in job strain, in undue stress. They're simple and quite appealing models because of the balance aspect, but the main sort of critique of them seems to be that they focus on specific demands or efforts that are not necessarily going to be applicable to every job. So perhaps they're not always valid in all settings. And then I came across the job demands resource model. It's similar, that it still has this idea of balancing factors. And we can see here a brief overview definition of demands and resources. And again, really, the demands are still efforts, basically. The physical, the emotional, the social effort required to do the job. And then resources, well, it's a bit broader. It's things that can help achieve the work goals, but also things that can help stimulate personal growth. And the main difference seems to be that this model doesn't sort of restrict itself to any particular resource. So any resource could be a demand that could affect employee health and well-being. Now, it would be sort of nice at this point to say, well, I'd been doing all of this reading before planning the summer pre-sessional. That's not quite what happened. But it has been a useful framework for thinking back and reflecting on what we were thinking about when we were planning the summer. Because as a whole team, as a programme team, we were thinking a lot about the teacher experience, because summer's already a busy time, and then we're layering on top all of these new things we're asking teachers to do. And so we were thinking, I mean, I've put here demands and resources. I think at the time we were probably framing them in terms of potential problems and possible solutions. And we thought of the kind of things I'm sure teams everywhere were considering. You've got the volume of work, you've got the deadlines, then we're layering on top of that the new technology, the potential for isolation and sort of discomfort with home working. And then we were able to learn a lot from our colleagues on what we call Pre-sessional 3, the pre-sessional that runs in the term leading up to summer. And they'd had to move obviously very, very rapidly online. And we were learning a lot from the tremendous amount of work they were doing. And teachers were saying, well, look, when you take away that anchor of the timetable, the face-to-face timetable, we're not always sure what we're supposed to be doing. Information is quite late in the day, which is understandable but stressful. So we started thinking about how we could perhaps mitigate this. A large amount of support was put in place at a programme level, particularly around training for the tech. And then we decided in induction to really address these issues specifically, explicitly, balancing work and life, the role of the teacher, huge concepts that you're not going to get to the bottom of in a sort of 30-minute induction session, but to start a conversation, to let people know that we were placing importance on on these aspects of their work, the well-being aspects. And then at the various course levels, we spent a lot of time on the undergraduate course, mapping the workload. We felt it was imperative that the workload stayed within the working week because people needed that break over the weekend from the screens. You know, having decided to go down the asynchronous route for the reasons that have been discussed, it was going to be a lot of sort of looking at screens, looking at text for the teachers. And we wanted to consolidate information as much as we could in a form of sort of weekly checklist, weekly document. And what really came up that I put in the middle here was this idea of communication, because it soon became apparent to us from the experiences people were already having that communication could be a resource, but could also be a demand, could be a problem. Communication can quickly get out of hand online. You can end up in very many teams, and these are the sorts of issues that can come up with people just being expected to respond to things constantly. And as a course director, I really reflected on the fact that under normal circumstances, the teachers go into a room for 4.5 hours a day, and it really doesn't matter how urgent I think something is. I can't run in there and tell them. I've just got to wait. And I wanted to retain for myself that idea of restricted communication in a way, really having to kind of plan forward what I was going to say and when. So what follows now in the yellow slides are some excerpts from our teacher induction, just to sort of give a flavour of the kind of things we talked about with the teachers. So we had some principles, some approaches around communication. And sort of core was we encouraged the teachers to think of teams like a physical staff room. So not something that you sit in all day, but a place where you sort of physically check in probably 3 times a day, and then you go away and you get on with what you need to do. We also decided as an undergraduate team to have meetings every single morning. And some people said, oh, you know, is this really necessary? You could do a lot of this asynchronously. But again, it was wanting to consolidate the communication and also have the kind of social aspect of getting together, the team aspect, but really trying to avoid a drip feed of communication during the day. And interestingly, when I set these up, I said to people, you know, they'll probably fade off during the summer, and they didn't. We really stuck to it because people did find it very useful. We mapped out for the teachers what a working week might look like, because again, you take away the anchor of a teaching timetable, and colleagues on PSE3 were saying, well, I just am not quite sure what to do when, and a lot of time was wasted that way. Perhaps it starts to look a bit prescriptive, sort of colouring it in, suggesting different tasks. But the feedback we were getting from teachers was that they wanted this, they appreciated some guidance to help them plan their time more effectively. And again, I think that's a feature of being in a largely asynchronous format. And also as well, we wanted to kind of show our working. You know, we felt it was important that the work could fit in the working week, and we wanted to show how. Then, of course, if people want to be flexible with their time, that's up to them. But we've got a model where we can do the work in the time that's there. We encourage people to share experiences of remote working. If you think back, you know, in sort of early June, this was very new to a lot of people. And we wanted just to have some language and conversation around the potential stresses that can arise and the strategies people use to address them. Again, just so we'd started a conversation that people felt they could come back to during the summer if they felt stress arising. And obviously people could share whatever they felt comfortable sharing in that respect. We gathered some tips as well from teachers who'd already moved remotely. and shared them. This is a sample. Again, in the middle, you can see a kind of trying to prepare people for this idea that it just feels very different. Things take longer. You get to the end of the day, you've been working all day, but you don't feel like you've really done anything because you haven't moved. And we try to sort of prepare people for those feelings that they might experience, and explain that that was something that we could talk about as well. This is an example of the weekly checklist that we devised for teachers on the undergraduate course. So giving them the student overview, then indicating what would need a teacher response, because I think that's quite confusing to discern in the asynchronous environment sometimes. And then again, really just mapping out for the teachers, okay, this is what you need to do, and this is how you can spend your time, so that teachers' valuable time isn't lost trying to look for what they need to be doing. Again, it all looks quite prescriptive, but it provides a guideline that people can then adapt to their needs. So, how did we do? I guess is the next question. Well, we didn't ask specifically about well-being in the teacher survey, but we did ask about working conditions and workload, because that's really how we'd been framing the sort of experience for ourselves. And this is a sample of the feedback from the undergraduate teachers. And I think the theme is clear, and it's something that's already emerged through other talks. The teachers are saying, yeah, actually, you managed the workload pretty well. You got that right. It wasn't too overwhelming. It was fine. But in terms of what we were spending our time doing, it perhaps wasn't that satisfying. We would have wanted more contact with the students. And actually, this was completely echoed with what the students were saying. They very clearly said that they would have wanted more time with the teachers. So that was interesting to see. And again, some of the teachers also spoke about this idea of feeling that they didn't really have that autonomy, that creativity, which just naturally comes when you're doing more live teaching, because of course you're then interpreting the materials as you deliver them, as you teach with them, even if somebody else has written them. So if we sort of go back and reflect, think back to that job demands resource model, we sort of clear what the potential demands, what the potential stresses were. And then if we think about the resources, well, what I've got there in green is the parts where I think we were more successful. I think the feedback's pretty clear that we did reduce the job demands. We sort of mitigated some of the problems that might have arisen, and teachers felt the workload was manageable. But perhaps the part of the framework where we didn't do as well the first time around was this idea of the resource, in the sense of people feeling the personal growth, the learning. I think teachers did feel that they learned a lot about the sort of the tech, but they just didn't have that kind of satisfying experience in terms of the teaching. So, I mean, again, going back to the parts in green, this was a key thing, you know, that the front loading of time to think about a communication strategy and to map the teaching workload each week, that was an incredibly beneficial investment of time. That meant that we got to the end of the summer, and everybody had been able to just keep going at a fairly even pace, which was good, and everybody, you know, felt good about that at the end of the summer. But in terms of these other aspects of job resources, the autonomy, the creativity, just that satisfaction of teaching. I saw on some pre-sessionals there were elements of team teaching that I think might have provided a nice environment for the teachers, again, to feel a bit more creative, a bit more as if they were doing something a bit more familiar and satisfying in that way. We we didn't perhaps balance that quite as well. And I think for me then as a course leader going forward, the challenge is to think about, well, how do we balance these things out so that we can let teachers have that synchronous contact with the students, we can let them have the autonomy, the creativity, but we still need to be mindful of the job demand. So we can't just start layering things on again and again. When things go on, things have to come off as well. So that's really where I am with my reflections around this model, which I've found quite a useful way of thinking about what went on over the summer from the teacher's point of view, perhaps. And yes, that brings me to the end there, if there are any questions.
It's always a moment where my screen decides to freeze. Thank you very much, Sarah. That was great to see a little bit more in depth of how you'd managed, and that communication channel was so important. A lot of the conversation on the chat has been actually about the previous presentation, but one or two comments around that need for communication.
Yeah.
And Camille at Manchester saying that the team leaders who always had instant messaging on seemed to be the ones who were more stressed, actually, than those who didn't. And I just wondered, did you see that between, in this case, more the management team itself rather than the tutors?
I would agree with that. Yes, I think once you start an expectation of sort of constant availability and people just communicating constantly, it can become very stressful for everybody involved, because I think it then erodes the sort of forward planning, which can help preempt stressful situations. So I would agree, and I for us really that kind of idea of the teams is the physical staff room was key. Don't sit in it all day because it just becomes overwhelming.
Yeah, it's a good way of actually putting it so people can picture it very quickly, can't they?
Yeah.
I see another question has come in from Helen saying, did you have any teachers who literally couldn't cope with the transition to online teaching?
No, we didn't. We had teachers who were more experienced. And I mean, I think another useful aspect of the approach we'd taken is because we'd been very mindful of the workload, the teachers had the space to support each other. And they did that very effectively. I think that was also an important thing to mention. So that helped a lot. But no, it was, I mean, the teachers, there was a lot of support put in place at a program level, and the teachers really did get stuck in and we're fine. Yeah.
Thank you. Sam's put in, how did this change impact your recruitment practices? Sam, perhaps if you're able to hop in or just confirm on chat whether that's staff recruitment or student recruitment. I'm assuming staff, but I'll let you clarify. Staff, okay.
The staff recruitment really was largely done by the time we sort of knew this was going to have to happen. And then I think at the program level, the program director, the head of EAP, did a lot of work sort of contacting teachers, letting them know what the situation would be. And I think they pretty much all decided to stick with it and join us. I think, like a lot of people, we'd always done quite a lot of teacher recruitment online, sort of Skype interviews and things like that, so that we weren't affected in that way. But no, I mean, it didn't really affect the recruitment too significantly, I don't think, given the timing of it.
Okay. Thank you. I'm assuming it's C. Robbie rather than Crobby, and puts a note there around bubble groups talks between teachers and the course directors worked very well. Did you find anything similar? I'm just wondering how that worked from your end.
Yes, I encouraged the teachers to set up group chats that I was not in. And I'm always quite explicit about that with teachers. I think it's important that they have a group that I'm not in, so that they can ask questions that they might not want to ask if I'm there. So yes, I very much encourage that. We had 3 intakes of teachers on the undergraduate because it's a 11, 9 and 6 week, and I encouraged them each to set up their chats, and I think that was really important as well.
Great, thank you. And I'll think we've got time for one last question, and I apologise. There are a few more that have come in. Perhaps, Sarah, if you're happy to look at these later at your leisure. How do you limit teacher meeting times? Some of our meetings went on for too long, basically. A question from Paul.
I'm quite a sort of strict meeting chair. I think you have to kind of move people through. We had them first thing in the morning. So they often were straight before people had to go and meet students for tutorials and teaching, just as you would if you were meeting in the staff room first thing in the morning. So that keeps everybody to time. And then the other key element was nothing really is new in the meeting. We had the teacher weekly checklist, which was sitting there all the time. So all we're doing in the meeting is just look at the document that's already known and just confirming, okay, we're doing this, that, the other today. Any questions? So I think that is the key, really, that you're not introducing new things in meetings. It's like flipped learning, isn't it? You can do all the discussion asynchronously, and then when you get into the meeting, you're just basically signing it off and tidying it up and confirming what's been agreed. I think that's important.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much for the presentation and for the content and those responses. I think it helps a lot of us already, just kind of sharing those ideas, and a lot to take away. And for me, I think it'll be the treating teams like the staff room is a great idea and a great way of putting it.